राधा माधव कुंज विहारी जय राधा माधव कुंज विहारी जय गोपीजन वल्लभा गिरिवरदारी जय गोपीजन वल्लभा गिरिवरदारी यशोदानंदन व्रजजन रंजन यशोदानंदन व्रजजन रंजन यमुना तीरा वनचारी यमुना तीरा वनचारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे जय प्रभुपदा जय प्रभुपदा शील प्रभुपदा जय प्रभुपदा जय प्रभुपदा शील प्रभुपदा जय ओम विष्णुपाद परमहंस परमहंस श्री श्रीमती स्वामी ग्रेसेस भक्तिवेदांत स्वामी श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। इस्कॉन संस्थापक आचार्य श्री प्रभुपाद की जय। जय ओम विष्णुपाद परमहंस परमहंस सदस्य श्रीमद भक्ति सिद्धांत सरस्वती गोस्वामी महाराज प्रभुपाद की जय। जय ओम विष्णुपाद लखोर किशोरदास बाबू महाराज की जय। जय ओम विष्णुपाद सच्चिदानंद श्री भक्ति ठाकुर की जय। जय ओम विष्णुपाद वैष्णव सार्वभौम श्री जगन्नाथ दास बाबू महाराज की जय। जय श्री रूप सनातन भट्ट रघुनाथ श्री जी गोपाल भट्टदास रघुनाथ षटपुर स्वामी प्रभु की जय। नमाचार्य दास ठाकुर की जय। प्रेम से कौशिक कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री द्वैत शिवशांति गौर भक्तवृंद की जय। श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गोप गोपीनाथ श्याम कुंड राधा कुंड गिरि गोवर्धन की जय। श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण भगवान की जय। श्री श्री जगन्नाथ बलदेव सुभद्रमयी सुदर्शन भगवान की जय। श्री मायापुर धाम की जय। श्री वृंदावन धाम की जय। गंगा माई की जय। यमुना माई की जय। भक्ति देव की तुलसी देवी की जय। अनंत कोटि वैष्णव की जय। श्री हरनाम संकीर्तन की जय। ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय। इस्कॉन वर्तमान गुरुवंद की जय। समय भक्तवृंद की जय। गौरव प्रेमानंदे हरि हरि बोल। All glories to the assembled. All glories to the assembled. All glories to the assembled. All glories to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. All glories to Shri Prabhupada की जय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वती व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरये। Nishtaprayeshu putreshu nityam bhagavad sevaya bhagavati uttama sloke bhaktir bhavati naishtihi. Hare Krishna. Welcome you all to the Tuesday morning Srimad Bhagavatam class. Today we are reading from Canto 3, Chapter 20, Text 4. Kim anvaprachan maitreyam virajas tirtha sevaya upagamya kushavarta asinam tattva vittamam. Kim anvaprachan maitreyam virajas tirtha sevaya upagamya kushavarta asinam tattva vittamam. Kim anvaprachan maitreyam virajas tirtha sevaya upagamya kushavarta asinam tattva vittamam. Translation Srila Prabhupada. Vidura was purified of all passion by wandering in sacred places, and at last he reached Haridwar, where he met the great sage who knew the science of spiritual life, and he inquired from him. Shaunaka Rishi therefore asked, what more did Vidura inquire from Maitreya? Here the word Viraja Tirtha Sevaya refers to Vidura, who was completely cleansed of all contamination by traveling to places of pilgrimage. In India, there are hundreds of sacred places of pilgrimage, of which Prayaga, Haridwar, Vrindavan, and Rameshwaram are considered principal. After leaving his home, which was full of politics and diplomacy, Vidura wanted to purify himself by traveling to all the sacred places, which are so situated that anyone who goes there automatically becomes purified. This is especially true in Vrindavana. Any person may go there, but even if he is sinful, he will at once contact an atmosphere of spiritual life and will automatically chant the names of Krishna and Radha. That we have actually seen and experienced. It is recommended in the Shastras that after retiring from actual life and accepting the Vanaprastha retired order, one should travel everywhere to places of pilgrimage in order to purify himself. Vidura completely discharged his duty, and at last he reached Kushavarta or Haridwar, where the sage Maitreya was sitting. Another significant point is that one must go to sacred places not only to take bath there, but to search out great sages like Maitreya and take instructions from them. If one does not do so, his traveling to places of pilgrimage is simply a waste of time. Narottam Das Thakur, a great Acharya of the Vaishnava sect, has for the present forbidden us to go to such places of pilgrimage because in this age, the times having so changed, a sincere person may have a different impression on seeing the behavior of the present residents of the pilgrimage sites. He has recommended that instead of taking the trouble to travel to such places, one should concentrate his mind on Govinda, and that will help him. Of course, to concentrate one's mind on Govinda in any place is a path meant for those who are most spiritually advanced. It is not for ordinary persons. Ordinary persons may still derive benefit from traveling to holy places like Prayag, Mathura, Vrindavana, and Haridwar. It is recommended in this verse that one find a person who knows the science of God or a Tattvavid. Tattvavid means one who knows the absolute truth. There are many pseudo transcendentalists, even at places of pilgrimage. Such men are always present, and one has to be intelligent enough to find the actual person to be consulted. Then one's attempt to progress by traveling to different holy places will be successful. One has to be freed from all contamination. At the same time, he has to find a person who knows the science of Krishna. Krishna helps a sincere person, as stated in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Guru Krishna Prasade, by the mercy of the spiritual master and Krishna, one attains the path of salvation, devotional service. If one sincerely searches for spiritual salvation, then Krishna, being situated in everyone's heart, gives him the intelligence to find a suitable spiritual master. By the grace of a spiritual master like Maitreya, one gets the proper instruction and advances in his spiritual life. Hare Krishna. Om Jnanandan Shalakaya Chakshurmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupakada Mahyam Tadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Udapadakamala Shri Guru Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sargana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sargana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kantan Murtite Saptakanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanusute Devi Pranamami Haripriye Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Moham Karodi Vachalam Devi Devi Pada Muhammad Shivaram Vedanta Parmanda Shri Chaitanya Mishram Hare Krishna. So here in this verse, it's mentioned as to how Vidura was purified of all the passion by wandering in sacred places, and at last he reached Haridwar, where he happened to meet his spiritual master Maitreya. So Shaunaka Rishi is asking, what more did Vidura inquire from Maitreya? We have some important points here. Now Vidura was actually a great devotee of the Lord. Though he was born of a Shudra woman, he was a great devotee, and he was not only a great devotee in the sense that he taught a lot of important, gave a lot of important instructions to Dhritarashtra, Duryodhan, and so forth. And finally, at one point of time, he realized that he was being insulted quite often. It was not worth staying in the palace. And so he left the palace, which was full of passion due to basically a lot of politics and diplomacy, and then he went on a pilgrimage. Now, what happens is basically any place where the Kshatriyas rule is dominated by passion and maybe even ignorance sometimes, particularly these days, because in the earlier days, the Kshatriyas used to rule their kingdom based on the advice of the Brahmanas. And Brahmanas were also in the mode of goodness. So their advice worked, and when they were ruling the kingdom based on such advices, the kingdom was perfectly ruled, because Brahmanas would advise what was basically given in the Shastras. So Sadhu, Shastra, and Guru, these are very, very important aspects in everyone's life. And that is how earlier we see the kingdoms were also very, very prosperous. So Vidura realized that his advice or instructions given by him were not listened to either by Dhritarashtra or even by Duryodhan. So at one point of time, he realized that it was better to leave the palace and go on a pilgrimage. So he went on a long pilgrimage. It is said that he went on a pilgrimage for almost 30 years. We might think that 30 years is very long a period, but that is how it was before. That Vanaprasthas, Grihasthas normally, particularly the male members, or sometimes even accompanied by their wife, husband and wife would go, and they would, after crossing 50 years, this is what Srila Prabhupada says, the first 25 years, then 50 years as Brahmachari, then Grihastha up to 50, and then Vanaprastha. Of course, these systems do not apply these days, but people generally used to go to these holy places of pilgrimage to purify themselves, because what determines their next life is based on what they do in the last years of life, that is Vanaprastha. And sannyasi system, of course, is not prevalent these days. So those who are there in the Grihastha status of life, they used to go on a pilgrimage for a long time. May not be 30 years, but maybe months together. Nowadays, we have difficulty even going on a pilgrimage for 10 days, what to talk about a month. But the purpose of going to a pilgrimage is given in this particular sloka, which is very, very important. Now, before we go into that, see, many times we also go on a yatra, and particularly I know Seshadripuram temple organizes yatra every year, except I think in 1 year they missed because of the corona or whatever it is. But then every year we go on a pilgrimage during Kartik month, and then once during the beginning of the year for Gaura Purnima or Vyas Puja, we visit places of pilgrimage like Mayapur. Now, what is the purpose of visiting these places of pilgrimage is what is given in this verse. Now, there are sacred rivers in all these places, but also there are places where the Lord has performed, or Lord's pure devotees have performed pastimes in these places. And hearing the glories of these places from devotees of the Lord is what is very, very important, and not just taking a bath and coming out. So, taking a bath and coming out also is purifying, not a question mark. But the problem is, it is mentioned the fifth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam that just taking bath many times, like if one might take bath, but then the same effect can be had by hearing about the pastimes of the place of pilgrimage from devotees of the Lord. In one hearing, a person can perfect his spiritual life. That is what is mentioned. Now, by taking bath, for example, in a Ganges river, it is said that both externally and internally one becomes purified. Definitely externally, definitely yes, but internally takes a lot of time. But the same thing, if one hears the pastime of Ganges river, as to how the Ganges came down and how people get purified about it, and then when they are in the Ganges, what happens is that the activity of taking bath in the Ganges also is purifying, and at the same time, hearing about the pastime of Ganges also purifies. Hearing is very, very important. Now, it is mentioned that we have 9 processes of devotional service: Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Padasevanam, Archanam, and so forth. Out of all these, of course, all are potent, but out of all these, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam is the most important. We are performing all these activities so that we reach the stage of Vishnu Smaranam. Now, for us to reach that stage of Vishnu Smaranam, out of these 3, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, it is said that even Kirtanam is very important. But even for Kirtanam, for example, chanting the holy name of the Lord is the most important factor of deliverance in this Kali Yuga. But to chant the name of the Lord, we have to hear the glories of the chanting of the holy name, which is hearing. And also, when we chant, we must hear the names of the Lord. So, hearing is a very, very important process. And that is why it is said that Shravanam is the most important of all the 9 processes of devotion service, and it is given as the first, Shravanam, Kirtanam. So, hearing is very, very important for any activity of devotional service. So, this is one point. And the rivers, for example, another important point is that it is said that particularly in the Bharatvarsha or in India, there are so many places of pilgrimage, and where the Lord has performed his pastimes, or the devotees of the Lord have performed their pastimes. Now, the hearing process is so important and so important that not only that when one bathes in the river, but even by hearing the glories of the river, or one can even recite the names of the rivers in their respective places wherever they are, and become purified. That is the power of reciting even the names of the Srila Prabhupada mentions in one of the purports in Srimad Bhagavatam. He says that all the rivers are transcendental, holy rivers are transcendental. Therefore, he says that one can be purified by even remembering them. We may not actually go to the Ganges river, but we can be seated in Bangalore. But if we are able to remember the glories of Ganges, or even touch the river or bathing, the effect is the same. And this process can have multiple potency, multiple effect also. So this is how Srila Prabhupada mentions that hearing is very, very important about the glories of the places of these pastimes. Now, these are places, not normal places. They are places either the Lord has performed, or the footprints of the Lord are established. For example, when Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu visited many holy places in South India, his footprints have been established in those places. So even they are called places of pilgrimage. Or The Lord's worshipable deities, Archa Vigraha, they are established and worshipped by the pure devotees of the Lord. So that is how these holy places or pilgrimage places are spiritually surcharged. And so what happens is that when somebody who is materially conditioned visits these holy places, then immediately he feels something is taking effect on him. That spiritual surcharge actually takes effect on that person, and some transformation definitely takes place, consciously or unconsciously. Many times we might not realize that some changes are taking place, but the change definitely takes place. And the more we hear from devotees of the Lord in these places, the more the effect is. Sometimes we may think, I know the Ganges River pastimes. But then, as I mentioned the last week's class, sorry, the week before the last, that hearing again and again is definitely very, very important. And if we hear with very rapt attention or a close attention, it has an immediate effect. And Srila Prabhupada mentions in this part about why hearing from devotee of the Lord is in a bona fide sampradaya is very, very important. For example, Srila Prabhupada gives an example about Vrindavan. Now, I also remember in my early days of in the moment, and I used to go on a yatra. The first time, I mean, I visited Vrindavan. I saw people, the residents of the Vrindavana, chanting Radhe, 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 Krishna, Radhe, Krishna, Radhe, Krishna. Now, it's very good. But then what happens is that as per our Shastras, we also hear that we are not qualified to utter the names of Radharani, Radhe Radhe. We cannot call her Radhe Radhe. So what happens is that when we hear that this is what we follow in our Sampradaya, and then we go there, we become cautious. So we know when we go to a spiritual place of pilgrimage that what we should do and what we should not do. That's why Srila Prabhupada mentions that one should be very careful when going to these places, because we must hear, first and the foremost is we must hear from a bona fide person, which is, I mean, devotees who are coming from the Sampradaya, our Sampradaya. And then, of course, hearing is very important than just going and seeing the places as a place of pilgrimage. Otherwise, what happens is there is no difference. It's like going to any other place of importance. It may be a historical place or whatever it is. But then when we go to these places in a group of devotees, not alone, of course, in a group of devotees, and then hear from devotees, then it has got a significant impact. Similarly, if we go to a place like Mayapur, it is said that there are so many different sects, sects means SCCT, so many communities who follow Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in different ways. Uh, Unlike we follow in a particular way, others may not be following in a particular way. So that is why it is said that one must hear from devotees who are free from sinful reactions. That can have immediate effect. Now, why it is mentioned here, there are always quotes from Srila Prabhupada that earlier the devotees of the Lord used to stay in these places of pilgrimage and make the place, keep the holy place in its purity. But now what happens, the system has changed. Many have left that place, and pure devotees of the Lord, they travel to preach the glories of these places. Why? The reason is that pure devotees carry the Lord in their heart. So their very presence makes the place holy. Now, when a materialistic person goes to these places, he washes off many of his sins. He may not be even knowing. But when pure devotees of the Lord travel to these places, they make the place surcharged with their spiritual potency because they always carry the Lord in the heart. That is the potency of pure devotees of the Lord. Now, example given is that is like Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada could have spent his final things in Vrindavan itself after he made multiple attempts. But still, he was given instructions by his spiritual master, and he left Vrindavan and traveled to USA and all the European countries at a very old age, which we can't even imagine. Forget about imagine. We can't even think that we can travel at the age that Srila Prabhupada traveled. And how many austerities, how much of austerities Srila Prabhupada undertook to preach the glories of the Lord. So this is how, in the current situation, pure devotees of the Lord travel to preach the glories of the Lord, and they can create the same potency by preaching the glories of the Lord. And when devotees hear with rapt attention, or anybody hears with rapt attention with proper mood, then what happens is that it has got immediate effect. Now, Vidura, this sloka is mentioned about Vidura. Now, Vidura himself was a very great devotee of the Lord, to the extent that there is a reference in the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Vidura actually, like I mentioned, he traveled for 30 years on pilgrimage. And after he came back, actually, he came with a higher purpose. Maharaj Yudhishthira greets Vidura in a very nice verse, which is there in Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, 13th chapter, 10th sloka, where he addresses Vidura, Bhavad Vida Bhagavatas Tirtha Bhutas Swayam Vibho Tirthe Kurvanti Tirthani Swantastena Gathapata. He says, my Lord, devotees like your good self are verily holy places personified. And because you carry the personality of Godhead within your heart, you turn all places into places of pilgrimage. Let us understand some very important points here about Vidura. He says, my Lord, devotees like your good self are verily holy places personified. That means Vidura himself as a personality was a personification of the holy places. But still, he undertook a visit of this pilgrimage for 30 years just to show how important is pilgrimage as going on pilgrimages. And the reason that is mentioned is that in the second half of the sloka, because they carry the personality of Godhead within their heart. And that's why he says, because you carry the personality of Godhead within your heart, you turn all places into places of pilgrimage. So a pure devotee of the Lord can always turn any place of into a place of pilgrimage. And that was the potency of Vidura. So this is how Maharaj Yudhishthira glorifies Vidura. And now here in the purport, Srila Prabhupada mentions as to how when we visit these places, one must go to not only take bath, but to search out for great sages like Maitreya and take instructions from them. If one does not do so, his traveling to place of pilgrimage is simply a waste of time. So here there is a mention about a great sage like Maitreya. Similarly, it may not be sometimes if we know, yes, there is a devotee of our sampradaya who is staying in that place, it is good to hear from them. Rather than sometimes we might travel with a group of devotees who may be well versed, but still if we are able to find a devotee in each of in these places who is coming from our sampradaya, then there is nothing better than that, because they know the importance of that place, and the purity with which they may speak may have multiple effects. And here Srila Prabhupada mentioned that one should find a person who knows the science of God, or a tattvavid. Tattva means one who knows the absolute truth and the importance of the place. Srila Prabhupada mentions about one has to be intelligent enough to find the actual person to be consulted. Then one's attempt to progress by traveling to different holy places will be successful. Now, in the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, Sudha Goswami says, O twice-born sages, by serving those devotees who are completely freed from all vice, great service is done. By such service, one gains affinity for hearing the message of Vasudeva. Now, we must have that affinity to hear. And how can one develop that inclination or affinity to hear? By serving such devotees. There will be pure different devotees of the Lord everywhere, but one must have an attitude to render service to those devotees. When we render service to pure devotees of the Lord, then we also want to hear the message of Vasudeva, or the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And because we are in an association of devotees, we might think, yes, I know, but the thing is there are many devotees who may be with us, who may not be knowing the same thing, importance of that pilgrimage of a particular place to the extent that we might have realized. So it is always good to look for a devotee of the Lord who can give us the importance of the place and then render a service. And by rendering service, we develop an attraction to hear. Now here there's a reference about in the purport about Narottam Das Thakura's, one of the quote, who is a very great Acharya of the Vaishnava sect. He says that Srila Prabhupada mentioned that he has forbidden us to go to such places of pilgrimage because in this age the times having been so changed, a sincere person may have a different impression on seeing the behavior of the present residents of the pilgrimage sites. So he recommends that instead of taking the trouble to travel such place, one should concentrate his mind on Govinda, and that will help him. Now this is also true because we can narrate or discuss the pastimes of the Lord even sitting wherever we are in the association of pure devotees of the Lord and have the same effect. But then Srila Prabhupada also mentions that there are two things. One is the places have become contaminated by people who want there for their own self satisfaction. That is, either they want to make money or places have become places of exploitation, which we also see. Many places we go, people want to make money out of us. The moment they see that pilgrims have come from outside, they want to extort money. Or they may be doing a business there which may not be fruitful enough either for them or for those visiting. They might think, okay, let me make some money in that place. But such places or such people may not have any effect. But Srila Prabhupada mentions, even though the conditions have degraded, still it has got its effect. Now, some examples are given. For example, it is said that it is true. When we go to Mayapur, we might visit so many places of pilgrimage like Haridas Thakur Samadhi or so. And every time when we go there, there might be different groups of devotees from different sampradayas or different followers who might sing different bhajans. And we should not get carried over by hearing those things. But on the other hand, we should be focused on what is given to us, that is chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. For example, we have heard many times that Srila Haridas Thakura used to chant 300,000 names a day. So instead of hearing something else from somebody else in that place, we should focus on how we can chant our rounds there and purify ourselves. Chanting the Mahamantra there in a place like Haridas Thakur Samadhi has got multiple effects, has got a lot of potency. So that is why it is said that we must go there and visit these places, but we should know the importance of that place before going, so that we know what we actually do there, not just see there as a samadhi, but then we can also go and practice our kirtan, do nam kirtan there or chant. So another example is given that many places the Lord may not be worshipped in a particular form for which the pastimes have been performed. For example, I don't remember offhand now. In Vrindavan, for example, Krishna might have performed some pastimes, but there might be devotees of the Lord who follow Lord Rama or Lord Narayana, and they might not relish that importance of that particular pastime. Like, for example, Krishna has got 4 additional qualities than what other incarnations has got. So these are things that important point that can be relished when we are in the association of devotees, and we hear from devotees of the Lord who are there in that place and can give the importance of the pastimes of these places. And if we don't hear, then what happens is that Srila Prabhupada says that the pilgrimage is not successful. There is a very nice verse in the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, where Lord Krishna, he speaks to the sages who have assembled there. Now they have all come on a pilgrimage, and Krishna says, actually the translation says, one who identifies his self as the inert body composed of mucus, bile and air, who assumes his wife and family are permanently his own, who thinks an earthen image or the land of his birth is worshipable, or who sees a place of pilgrimage as merely the water there, but who never identifies himself with, feels kinship with, or worships or even visits those who are wise in spiritual path or spiritual truth, such a person is no better than a cow or an ass. So what are the points that this sloka Lord Krishna himself emphasizes on this particular sloka which I recited is, one who identifies himself as the inert body made of mucus, bile and air. That means one who considers his body as, we always say, kapa, pitta, vayu, who considers, rather he considers as a material body and not the spirit soul. And then who assumes his wife and family are permanently his own. I mean, there is no family member whom we can claim permanently, which I mentioned in the previous class. All our relations are temporary. So such a person, and one who thinks an earthen image or land of his birth is worshipable. For example, if we are here in Bangalore, we might think that we are from Karnataka. We might not want to associate with the people of the same movement who may be hailing from a different place. For example, that is also considering oneself to be as a person hailing from a land of his birth. This is one. And then Krishna says, one who sees a place of pilgrimage as merely the water there. That means once we go there to a holy place, we just see the place as merely some water there. No. But one who never identifies himself or feels kinship with, worships, or even visits those who are on the spiritual path. That means we should look for persons who are on the proper spiritual path and feel kinship, or we should feel that some sort of a relationship. Yes, he is a devotee of the Lord from whom I can hear, and or worships. One should worship such a devotee of the Lord. And if one does not follow these, then that person is no better than a cow or an ass. It's a very important verse that is quoted regularly in the classes. So I thought it is good to quote this verse here. So when we hear these pastimes of the Lord or pastimes of the devotees of the Lord again and again, the purification takes place in us. Now, it is also mentioned that Vidura was fortunate enough to have association of the Lord Krishna personally on a one-to-one. But still, what happened was when Vidura left on a pilgrimage, what happened was that the Lord wound up his pastimes and left instructions with Uddhava. Now, Uddhava was a very great devotee of the Lord. But the Lord left instructions from Uddhava. Now, both of them met during this pilgrimage. Now, Uddhava left after the Lord wound up his pastimes, and he was going to Badrikasrama. And it is said that Vidura met Uddhava, and he wanted to hear from Uddhava about the glories of the Lord. But Lord had left instructions to Uddhava that he will be meeting Vidura and Vidura should take instructions from Maitreya. So this is an important point here of how Vidura met Maitreya and what was the importance of Vidura meeting Maitreya. Now the important point is spiritual life means taking instructions not only from pure devotees of the Lord, but obeying these instructions. Now here we'll understand the Lord could have given instructions to Uddhava to give instructions to Vidura, but the Lord did not do that. But the Lord told Uddhava that you ask Vidura to meet Maitreya. Now Maitreya Rishi is a very great senior devotee of the Lord, and he was also present when the Lord gave instructions to Uddhava. Maitreya Rishi was also present. So Maitreya Rishi performed the role of a spiritual master in this particular case for Vidura. That is very, very important. And Maitreya Rishi heard from Krishna when Uddhava was present, And Krishna told Maitreya Rishi that you give instructions to Vidura. The reason is that Uddhava was also a great devotee of the Lord, but the Lord thought that it is better that Vidura hears from Maitreya. So the point is that Maitreya became the spiritual master of Vidura. The Lord found it most suitable for Vidura to take instructions from Maitreya rather than Uddhava. So the point is that we might come across many devotees of the Lord, but the instructions to accept someone as a spiritual master comes from the Lord. It is not that everyone can have one person as a spiritual master. For example, even in our movement, we have so many gurus, but then the arrangement for a disciple to accept a spiritual master comes from the Lord. It is not, we might have a desire, but the Lord arranges in such a way that we are in a position to accept that spiritual master and take transcendental knowledge from him. That is very, very important. So it is mentioned that the knowledge comes down in the descending order from the Lord to Brahma, and Brahma to Narada, and so forth. Now, for example, we see we have so many people, and when we go outside, we might also hear many times people putting Gayatri mantra on a loudspeaker, but it doesn't have effect on everybody because it is not coming from a one fight parampara. Therefore, one should accept a spiritual master from the parampara and accept the mantra as well as accept the spiritual master and take transcendental knowledge from such devotees or pure devotees of the Lord. Why? Because the moment one accepts a spiritual master, it is said that one must hear more as much as possible from one spiritual master. Of course, hearing from within the sampradaya has got its effect, but the more one hears from a spiritual master, the more impetus one gets in terms of purification. Of course, Srila Prabhupada has given a quote that to receive transcendental knowledge, one has to accept a spiritual master in one of the four bona fide sampradayas. And he says, unless one receives a mantra from any of these sampradayas, the so-called mantras are useless, which is what is there as a quote in Srimad Bhagavatam 6th canto. That is why Vedic knowledge is called Shruti, because it must be heard from authorities. That is why Krishna himself states in Bhagavad Gita, Evam Parampara Praptam. The supreme science was thus received by Arjuna through the chain of disciplic succession. And similarly, all the saintly kings understood in that way. So by the grace of a spiritual master like Maitreya, one gets proper instructions and advances in spiritual life, for which one must have the proper attitude also. One must not think that when he hears, I know this, I know that, but one must, so it is given that one should hear with rapt attention, fully focusing into the subject matter. One must be fully focused. For example, if one is going to Mayapur, one must focus his distinct mind on glories of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And one must have an intense greed to hear and understand and become absorbed in that matter. That is how it is said that Parikshit Maharaj urged Sukadeva Goswami to continue without being disturbed. So when we go, we must have that glory, need in us. We must develop that need in us that we want to hear from the devotees of the Lord there. Of course, there are other important points like one should respect the speaker and also be very submissive in hearing. Srila Prabhupada always stresses on the fact that purity is the force. So both the person who is speaking must have the purity, who is observing the regulative principles and has that spiritual enthusiasm, and the person who is hearing also must be free from these regulative principles, should have been observing these regulative principles, then it has got immediate effect. One should not only be physically present, but also be mentally present when on the places of, when going on a place of pilgrimage. And when a sincere devotee vibrates, then it is said that the Lord appears in that vibration. The Lord considers him a sincere devotee to be the same as his own self and manifest in that sound vibration of that devotee. This is how the Lord gives purification. And before I conclude the class, there is a verse in Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd canto itself, where Maitreya is, Vidura is addressing Maitreya. Vidura is glorifying Maitreya in this verse, saying that for one who is anxious to engage constantly in hearing such topics, Krishna Katha gradually increases his indifference to all other things, such constant remembrance of the lotus feet of Lord Krishna by the devotee results in transcendental bliss and vanquishes all miseries without delay. That means for one who becomes eager, develops that eagerness to hear Krishna Katha or such pastimes in such places, what happens is that one gradually increases his indifference to all other things. We might have anarthas, everyone has got anarthas, but when we hear the glories of the Lord from the pure devotees of the Lord in those places, then what happens is that we develop an indifference to other things in life. We all have. So, but when we hear, then with rapt attention, then what happens is that we become indifferent to these things. And the result is that such constant remembrance of the lotus feet of the Lord by the devotee, what happens is that he achieves what is called a transcendental bliss. One becomes very, very blissful after hearing this Krishna Katha from pure devotees of the Lord. And the outcome of all this is that one vanquishes all miseries without delay. We all have a lot of miseries in life, but what happens is that when we hear from devotees of the Lord, then we become free of many, many anarthas, and we become free from the miseries of this life also, which we encounter on a day-to-day basis. That's how we might feel, oh, I went on a yatra, how blissful it was. And why do we come back, or why did I come back? This is the effect of going to a place of pilgrimage and hearing from pure devotees of the Lord. So this is perfect example of Vidura meeting Maitreya there. So that is why even my spiritual master, His Holiness Jayapatak Maharaj, always mentioned that we must hear about the glories of the Lord before we, at least something we must know about the importance of the place of the Lord. So what happens is that we know how to hear, what to hear, and how to be careful in these places. So we are well prepared, and when we have a sincere desire, it is said that the Lord arranges for the pure devotees of the Lord also, so that we can hear from them. This is all I had for today's class. I can, for the next few minutes, I can take some questions or some comments on the subject matter. Does anyone have any questions, comments? Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Any questions, any comments? Otherwise, can I take the class as concluded? So I suppose everyone has understood the subject matter. So with this, I am concluding the class. Granthra Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.